So, my professor, I want to give us your opinion, how you thought about rebuilding Bibliotheca Alexandrina again.
I was interested in the fate of the library since my student days, because you know there is a controversy. Who burned the library? When did it disappear? And the opinion is divided. And conclusive evidence is very difficult to find. Most of our pieces of evidence are partial evidence. And the first time I talked in public about the ancient library was at Cambridge during my student days. You see, my mind was always occupied, even I never wrote about it, like I was occupied mentally with the ancient library. When I came back from England, and that was in end of 1960, I noticed that the library, old libraries in Egypt, stopped developing.
Mm-hmm.
And it so happened that in those years there was trouble all the time with Israel and wars.
Yes.
56 and 67 and afterwards. And there was the slogan that no voice is higher than war.
Yeah.
So I realized the enormous difference between academic conditions in Egypt and in England and in Europe and in many other countries. So I thought that the only way to revive academic life, to give it a push, is to have a good life for the university.
Mm.
And it so happened that in 1972, November, the Professor Lutfi Dwidar was president of the university, and Saad Zaghlul Abdel Hamid was dean of the Faculty of Arts.
Mm-hmm.
And he was appointed for reasons. I don't know the reasons, but there was trouble within the union, the university union. So he was appointed as head of the administration of
University?
not the university, of Hayat al-Tadris, the student, the faculty club. Faculty. Well, between the three of us, Saad Zaghlul, Lutfi Dwidar and myself, we once talked about the ancient library and the need for a library, and Lutfi Dwidar said, that he was interested in establishing a good library for the university. So, to prepare the mind at the university, come and give us a talk about the ancient library. I gave the talk at the faculty club, and at the end I addressed the people concerned, the director, the president, other people. If the University of Alexandria wants to have any claim to be related to ancient Alexandria, we must follow the example of the ancient city. The ancient city, in order to become a center of learning, started by founding a universal library.
And in that time, you published or you wrote a book about the ancient library?
That's right. A booklet. It's the same article, but elongated and more details. I published a booklet on the ancient library, I think about 1975, 2 years later, or 3 years later. And I said that a British author, end of 19th century, Macaulay, once said that a university is a library. You know, without a library there is no learning and no academic research.
Of course.
And I said, I know that the country, our government cannot afford the expenses of a new library on the scale of being universal. In this connection, I would like to say that the importance of the ancient library of Alexandria was not the first library. There had been libraries in ancient Egypt, usually great temples like Karnak, like Edfu,
used as a library.
Always had a library. And Babylon and Syria also had great libraries. Much earlier than Alexandria. And even Athens had a good library, good public library. But Alexandria Library was unique in its conception as becoming a universal library. All other libraries in Egypt or Babylonia or
Athens,
whatever were local libraries.
even Rome.
Even Rome. Interested in the history of the country, of the events that took place in the history of the country and the memory of the people, and it was relatively limited in number, but with the backing of King Ptolemy I and King Ptolemy II and the third, they devoted sums of money Egypt in those days was a rich country. And we are told that King Ptolemy I promised Demetrius of Pharos, Demetrius Valerian, whatever amount of money you need, I am ready to cover. And he asked him, I would like our library in Alexandria to possess writings of all nations, provided they are worthy of study. So there was a kind of awareness, a vision of how a great library should be. So with this information I said, our library, if we want to plan a library, we must have it universal, on the pattern. And actually the pattern of Alexandria was repeated afterwards in Baghdad, Beit al-Hikmah, in Cairo, Dar al-Hikmah,
اللي هي بعد كده دار الكتب,
in Cordoba, and in European countries they decided to have universal libraries. In Paris, in London, Washington, and in Moscow, and in China.
So why not to be again in Alexandria?
Let us, follow our own experience, past experience, which became a model for universal thinking concerning libraries. So I said that the government in those days could not afford expenses of a great library. And in those days also it happened that there was a project for saving the monuments and remains of Nubia. Best known is Abu Simbel.
Yes.
And they said the UNESCO adopted the project of excavating Nubia. Let us appeal to the UNESCO. And see what the result will be, or the response will be. Anyway, the idea caught fire. Lutfi Dwidar was
Push.
most enthusiastic. And at the time, the vice president was Fuad Hilmi,
Yes.
the architect. And he was interested in the architecture of Alexandria, of the Library of Alexandria. Now, of the architecture of libraries in general. And he traveled to visit.
He became the governor after that.
He became governor after that. So, Lutfi Dwidar formed a committee to prepare the project to be presented to the government and to the president of the country. We started working throughout the 70s, but it so happened by the end of the 70s, Lutfi Dwidar retired. And there was a new president who was not interested in a library, but interested in a cultural center. That was Mahmoud al-Hadar.
Hadar.
He said culture center will be more interesting. Anyway, the project never materialized. And in '84, because in the years of the end of the 70s and in the beginning of the 80s, I was delegated to Beirut. So I was absent from the scene here. In '84 I came back, and on a social occasion I happened to meet the new president of the university, Mustapha. As soon as he saw me, he said, I want you to tell me what happened to the project of the library, because I keep receiving letters from Germany, from the United States, France, and other places, inquiring about a project of reconstructing or reviving the ancient library of Alexandria, and they mention your name, because it happened that in those years I used to travel a lot, and wherever I went I talked about our project, the ancient library and how to revive it. Anyway, I met him and explained to him what happened, and he said, don't worry about the cultural center. The government is not interested. And the Minister of Education, Mustapha told him that. Because Mustafa Halbi is a brother of Fuad Halbi, so he was emotionally involved. Well, the main contribution, no doubt, of the ancient library was the services it presented to the Museum, which was a research institute. And it is behind what we can call the Alexandrian science revolution. Euclid, Herophilus, Eratosthenes, I mean, a long list of most outstanding scholars in the history of science in general and in literature. Callimachus, Theocritus, and others. So, it was a research library. The new library did not have the financial resources that would enable her to develop in a few years into a universal library. Books have become very expensive, both printed books and digital books. Therefore, and scholars in those days were very well paid by the king.
Yes.
Anyone who provides an original piece of work is recommended generously. So, in this case, the university library, the modern Alexandria library, is developing as a cultural library, but not as a research library.
And as a scientific library.
Yes. Scientific and universal libraries are very, very expensive. So the difference is, but it is a contribution to the modern city of Alexandria. Alexandria lacked a cultural center of attraction on the level we have, and as a cultural center it's functioning efficiently, but not as a research.
Not as a